Chapter 1. The Wrong Room Key. In a monotonously bright hotel suite, a small figure sat at the edge of a 2-meter wide bed, shoulders trembling, the little tuft of hair on his head quivering sadly. The boy's eyes were red and watery from crying. He lowered his head slightly, biting his lip to stop himself from sobbing aloud as tears fell like strings of pearls. His mother's and stepfather's words still echoed clearly in his ears. "Lolo, please agree. Your father's project is really important. Don't worry, you're a boy. You won't get pregnant from spending one night with him," his mother had earnestly said. "You can't possibly let your sister go, can you? Xing Luo, Mr. Li specifically requested you. I promise you, if this project succeeds, I'll give you a 30% share. You know how expensive your tuition is," his stepfather had said, smiling with a hint of menace, a look Xing Luo would never forget. Su Xing Luo rubbed his swollen eyes with his tender hands. He had seen this Mr. Li before. When he had gone to deliver documents to his stepfather, Mr. Li had stared at him without blinking. Xing Luo had looked back at him, and Mr. Li's fierce appearance had left him with nightmares that very night. He was bald and very large. Xing Luo never thought such a man would be interested in him. Looking at his phone, he saw it was already 10 p.m. He had been crying since 9 p.m. His eyes were indeed swollen. Feeling ugly, tears once again welled up in his eyes. Looking down at the suggestive clothes his mother had specifically chosen for him, he felt awkward and ashamed, constantly covering the low neckline with his small hands. Despite having prepared himself mentally before coming, the unfamiliar environment of the hotel brought forth all his accumulated grievances and fears, making tears stream down his face. At that moment, he heard a noise from the door, causing his heart to leap into his throat. His almond-shaped eyes widened in fright, making him look like a startled rabbit. Steady footsteps approached slowly. Xing Luo's heart seemed to be in sync with those steps, making him want to crawl under the bed. He tightly gripped the bedsheet, head lowered in fear and tension, lips pressed tightly together. The footsteps drew closer, finally stopping in front of him. Shiny black leather shoes came into view, reflecting the warm light of the ceiling lamp, yet exuding a cold aura. After a pause, the shoes took a big step towards him, and a large hand roughly lifted his delicate chin. His chin hurt terribly, showing prominent red marks where he was pinched. Tears streamed down his face as he looked up through blurred vision at the godlike yet infuriatingly handsome face above him. It seemed unreal to him, and he blinked in disbelief, thinking, how can someone look this good? The man's eyes, like vast stars, looked at him with a cold, moonlit gaze that exuded an icy distance. Yet hidden within was a rebellious fire that added a deadly allure. "Who sent you?" The man's magnetic yet cold voice came from his sensual lips. Like a plucked string, Xing Luo's wet eyelashes trembled at the sound of his voice. Stammering, he said, You aren't Mr. Li." He suddenly remembered the girl he had bumped into in the hallway and glanced at the room key on the bedside table. They had dropped their keys together. His response made the man's expression change, but he grasped the name, furrowing his brow in irritation and pulling his tie tighter, his voice growing colder. "Li Fangyi." Xing Luo didn't know if that was Mr. Li's name, but he could feel the man's grip tightening, causing his tears to fall even faster. With a strong nasal tone, he stubbornly said, "You aren't Mr. Li." Yong Yichen's eyes darkened, and the pitiful person in his grip fueled his desire even more. The tear-filled almond eyes made him hard, and those moist lips made him want to lose control and press him down. Yong Yichen leaned closer to Su Xing Luo's ear, his warm breath causing Xing Luo's white ear to turn red. "Tell me quickly, what's Li Fangyi's purpose in sending you to my bed?" His grip tightened again. The man's heavy breathing and fierce tone made Xing Luo tremble all over, speaking in broken fragments. "I don't know." Seeing the person in front of him unable to speak clearly, Yong Yichen frowned, his internal heat and frustration overwhelming his rationality. "Speak." He suddenly threw him onto the bed, impatiently tearing off his tie and throwing it to the ground, the effects of the drug becoming more intense. Xing Luo was truly frightened now. Although this man didn't look as fierce as Mr. Li, his personality was just as fierce. Trembling, he said, "I took the wrong room." He felt his excuse was flimsy and no one would believe it, but it was the truth. Sure enough, the man's face darkened, and he pressed down on him like a mountain. Xing Luo could clearly feel a hard object pressing against his thigh, making his whole body stiffen, his face turning pale. The man tightly gripped his wrists, raising his knife-sharp chin and glaring at him with bulging veins, growling, "Do you want to die?" Yong Yi-chin gritted his teeth, barely holding onto his sanity. The drug was taking a strong effect. Su Xing Luo, yelled at so fiercely, was stunned for a moment before crying even harder, tears streaming down like a flood. Struggling with the pain in his wrists, he cried out, "Let me go! I want to go home." His cries and struggles were the last straw for Yong Yi-chin, snapping the last thread of his rationality. That night was destined to be sleepless, both for Su Xing Luo and Yong Yi-chin. Chapter 2. Fever. The phone rang incessantly, but its owner was too exhausted from the previous night to be aware of anything. However, the sound disturbed the person next to him. Yong Yi-chin, not opening his eyes, irritably reached for the source of the noise and threw it against the wall without hesitation. With a loud crash, silence finally returned. Just as Yong Yi-chin was about to continue sleeping, the noise woke Su Xing Luo. The loud crash made Xing Luo open his eyes abruptly, meeting a breathtakingly handsome face up close. For a moment, he was stunned. Memories of this face looming over him the previous night flooded back. Fear filled Xing Luo's almond-shaped eyes, and his whole body ached. This man, to him, was like a devil. The pain in his body, combined with his emotional distress and fear, made tears well up in his eyes. Why did it have to be so painful? Why treat him like this? Xing Luo bit his lip, forcing himself to stay calm. He didn't know this stranger, but judging by his violent nature, he wouldn't let him go easily. Xing Luo, feeling like a fish on the chopping block, had to find a way to escape. But as soon as he moved slightly, pain shot through him, making him almost cry out. The physical pain brought tears to his eyes. He felt feverish, his whole body burning, his head dizzy. The sticky feeling below made him extremely uncomfortable. Biting his lip, he tried to prop himself up with his hands but failed. His weak body, after enduring such torment, found even getting up a challenge. A familiar and loathsome taste surged in his stomach. Xing Luo, feeling like a deflated balloon, relaxed his fists, tears falling more freely. The sense of dishevelment deepened his self-loathing. Why am I so useless? Why is this happening to me? Why did they do this to me? Lost in his own emotions and delirious from the fever, Xing Luo's sobs grew louder and more uncontrollable. Yong Yi-chin opened his eyes irritably. "Shut up." Xing Luo paused for a moment, but his grievance and self-loathing overcame his fear. He cried even louder. Yong Yi-chin, agitated, turned him over to face him, and his expression changed upon touching Xing Luo's skin. He was burning up. Seeing the red and tear-streaked face of the pitiful person before him, Yong Yi-chin immediately felt his forehead. His expression darkened. The heat was intense, like an egg could be fried on his forehead. He quickly threw off the blanket and got out of bed. The person was his responsibility. He had caused this. Finding his phone on the floor, he called his assistant, who answered promptly. "President, bring a doctor and a set of clothes over here." Seeing the tearful, frail figure on the bed, Yong Yi-chin pressed his high nose bridged. Although his assistant was puzzled, he responded immediately. "Yes." After hanging up, Yong Yi-chin looked at his own naked body and headed to the bathroom. Wrapping a towel around his waist, he returned to the bedside and lifted the blanket. Xing Luo immediately curled up like a shrimp, staring at him with wary eyes. Seeing the bruises and disarray, like a pitiful kitten, Yong Yi-chin felt a rare pang of guilt and heartache. Bending slightly, he awkwardly and cautiously said, "Taking a bath might make you feel better." Xing Luo looked at him as if he were an executioner, his eyes red, filled with tears, long lashes trembling. his frail body curling up even more. Yong Yi-chin, who had never comforted anyone before, felt a strange unease. Despite his temper, he had never bullied anyone before. Seeing Xing Luo, whom he had bullied so badly, a sense of panic rose within him. You feel uncomfortable right now. You need to take a bath. He frowned. Xing Luo ignored him, maintaining his curled-up posture, protecting himself in his small world. Yong Yi-chin, seeing that a gentle approach didn't work, decided to use force. He scooped Xing Luo up, making him struggle like a frightened rabbit. But in his weakened state, he couldn't resist. His hands weakly pushed against Yong Yi-chin's chest, head hanging down, biting his lip as tears streamed down. He felt utterly useless. Feeling the trembling figure in his arms, Yong Yi-chin softly said, "Don't be afraid." Xing Luo, delirious with fever, didn't hear him at all. While bathing, Xing Luo fell asleep. Yes, he needs to go to the hospital. His fever keeps recurring, and he's still unconscious. Through hazy eyes, Xing Luo saw two figures standing by the bed. Yes, President. He felt himself being lifted, as if floating, and struggled to open his eyes. He met a pair of gentle eyes. You're awake. The voice was filled with surprise. Feeling inexplicably safe, Xing Luo was relieved. Although he didn't know who this person was, he was glad it wasn't the man from the night before. Leaving the hotel, he realized it was night again. Hadn't he just closed his eyes for a moment? Ring, ring, ring. The phone rang again. The man who had been carrying him answered respectfully, "President." Yes, he just woke up. Okay. Sitting beside him, Xing Luo vaguely heard the man's voice on the other end. His thoughts drifted as his eyelids grew heavy again. When he next woke up, the familiar smell of alcohol told him he was in a hospital. He looked up at the pure white ceiling and turned his head slightly. Seeing the sunlight streaming in, he was momentarily confused. How had it turned to day again? It felt like magic, the day changing with a blink of his eyes. Click. Footsteps sounded from outside. When they stopped, a cold voice spoke above him. Are you feeling better? Xing Luo, dazed, turned his head to see a well-dressed man exuding an air of nobility, his black eyes gazing down at him coldly. It was the man from that night. Why was he here? Frowning, Yong Yi-chin asked again, "Are you feeling better now?" Xing Luo, fearful and apprehensive, answered softly, I'm better." Chapter 3. Refusing Compensation. Seeing that Su Xing Luo seemed somewhat better, Yong Yi-chin felt an inexplicable sense of relief. He sat down on a chair by the bed. Xing Luo's fear made him instinctively move slightly, but he did so discreetly. Yong Yi-chin, unfazed by his actions, spoke coldly, "Mr. Su, there was indeed a misunderstanding that night." He had already had the incident investigated thoroughly the night before. Misunderstanding? Xing Luo repeated, not quite understanding. Yong Yi-chin was concise. "I was set up." Not giving Xing Luo time to react, he continued, "I apologize for that night. I will compensate you." Xing Luo, seeing his attitude change so much, felt his resentment lessen considerably. He quickly said, No need." After all, the misunderstanding was partly due to his mistake with the room key. Despite the trauma, he didn't want to hold on to it. Yong Yi-chin, seeing his frail frame, recalled his deep-set collarbone and slender waist. He also remembered how Xing Luo had been feverish for an entire day and night. Feeling a sense of guilt, he firmly rejected Xing Luo's refusal. "This is your due. Don't refuse. Also, your phone was broken by me. I asked my assistant to buy a new one, which will be brought over this afternoon." But before Xing Luo could finish, Yong Yi-chin stood up and said, "I have a meeting. I won't stay long." His words of refusal took a turn. "Oh, okay." Yong Yi-chin gave a polite smile and turned to leave. Watching Yong Yi-chin's departing figure, Xing Luo felt a pang of disappointment at not having the chance to refuse properly. He knew the man was determined to compensate him, but he really didn't want it. In the afternoon, a gentle-looking man with glasses came to Xing Luo's hospital room. Xing Luo was sitting and gazing out the window. Hello, Mr. Su. I'm Li Yi, Mr. Yang's assistant. You can call me Li Yi. The president sent me to discuss your compensation, he said with a polite smile, extending his hand. Hello, Mr. Li Yi, Xing Luo replied with a pale smile, shaking Li Yi's hand. He silently added, so the man's name is Yong Ichenda. After the greeting, Li Yi sat down and sincerely asked, How are you feeling? Any discomfort? Li Yi had been surprised to hear from the doctor about the injuries inflicted by his boss and felt sympathy for the frail-looking Xing Luo, who seemed as delicate as a small white rabbit, evoking a strong sense of pity. I'm much better. Thank you for asking, Xing Luo said gratefully. By the way, this is for you. Li Yi handed over a repaired phone and a new one. I had your phone repaired, thinking there might be something important in it. The new one is compensation. Xing Luo only took his old phone, softly thanking him. Thank you. Turning it on, he felt relieved to see it working. Li Yi then produced a card. This is a 1 million yuan card, no password. It's your compensation. Xing Luo was stunned. 1 million? Li Yi, understanding his surprise, explained calmly, You don't need to feel burdened. The president said this is what you deserve. After all, the president had put him in the hospital. Xing Luo, who had always been frugal and worked part-time while studying, knew the value of money. He had never dreamed of having 1 million yuan. Why would the man give him so much so casually? No, really. Xing Luo quickly shook his head, genuinely shocked. His face turned even paler. Li tried to persuade him gently, It's fine. Since the president is willing to give it to you, there's no need to hesitate. Besides, aren't you still in university? Knowing about his part-time work and the exploitation by his stepfather, Li Yi hinted subtly, hoping Xing Luo would accept the money. But Xing Luo, with a firm and steady voice, said, Please take it back. Tell your president that I appreciate his intention, but I don't need compensation. Li Yi, seeing the seemingly fragile young man with such a determined gaze, respected his decision. Unsure of how to persuade him, Li Yi smiled wryly. You should speak with our president. I can't decide this. He dialed a number. After a few rings, the other side answered, President. After a brief pause, a cold voice responded, Yes, what is it? Li glanced at Xing Luo and explained the situation before cautiously asking, Would you like to speak with Mr. Su? There was a brief silence before the president's impatient voice replied, No need. Just give him the card and stop wasting time. The call ended abruptly. Feeling caught in the middle, Li awkwardly smiled at Xing Luo. The president insisted you take it. There's no need to feel bad. But before Xing Luo could finish, Li stood up. Sorry, Mr. Su. I just remembered I have a meeting at 2. I need to leave. But Xing Luo held the card and phone box. Goodbye. Li Yi quickly left, leaving Xing Luo holding the items, feeling helpless. Why were these two people like this?